Welcome to Demonic Diaries, the YouTube channel where we explore the darkest corners of the human mind. Join me, your host, as I delve into the pages of terrifying tales and haunting stories. From the depths of hell to the darkest depths of the human psyche, we'll be your guide through the most bone-chilling and spine-tingling stories that will keep you up at night. So buckle up and prepare to be scared, because on Demonic Diaries, every story has a dark side. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of new videos. Let's get started. Number 1. You hear the uneven footsteps first. Drag, click, drag, click. That's how you know she's behind you. The heel is broken off of her left shoe, and she drags it across the ground with every step, a sharp contrast to the steady click of her still intact pump. "Help me," she whispers. It's an urgent, anguished plea. "Please, I'm hurt, help me." Don't turn around. That's when she gets you. Don't run. She still gets you, but this time, she's going to make it hurt. At least, that's the rumor, anyway. Every small town has at least one, a local urban legend that everyone knows and swears is true, because their sister's best friend's cousin's neighbor's grandson knew a fella who actually encountered it. Ours was the Limping Woman, so named for her aforementioned distinct gait. It was said that she was a teacher at the elementary school some decades before, young, beautiful, and the victim of a terrible murder. She had been walking home to the house she shared with her parents one night after school when she realized she was being followed. She sped up, and so did her pursuer, until both were running down this dark country lane with only open farmland on either side. Her heel broke and her ankle snapped, and she fell, and her pursuer became her murderer. It was a slow, torturous affair that left her beaten and covered in stab wounds, and, when the killer was done, he just left her to bleed out beside the road. She wasn't found until the next morning, and by then, all anyone could do was search for the person responsible. While some believe the man was caught and dealt with not long after, others think he or she is still at large, and the Limping Woman, as the victim came to be known, would rest until her killer is caught. I was always skeptical at best of this story. I passed the spot where she was supposed to appear 100 times without incident, as did everyone else I knew. If a murderous ghost lived there, I was pretty sure I'd have seen her. I said as much to my friend Steffi when she brought up that a friend of a friend of a friend had met the Limping Woman during lunch at school one day. It's true. She was out on the old highway a couple nights ago and saw her. Steffi insisted stubbornly over our sandwiches. If she actually saw her, wouldn't she be dead? I asked. I thought you weren't supposed to turn around. Heard her, whatever, you know what I mean, Rena. Sure, I said with a roll of my eyes. It always frustrated Steffi that I didn't share her willingness to believe the unbelievable. So how'd she get away? She said the words, duh. Oh, right, the woman's last words. Last words we all somehow know without ever having caught the one person who would have heard them. We know them because the real killer was never caught. He told people who told other people. And we all just magically knew to use them to ward off being killed. I finished for her. Steffi frowned. She loved all things spooky and supernatural, and had spent a lot of time researching our local legends, especially the Limping Woman. It's not magic, it just reminds her of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. Okay, I said, hoping that would be enough to put an end to the topic. It was an argument neither of us would win, and I didn't feel like getting into it again over whether or not a ghost was real. At 15, it was starting to feel silly. Steffi, however, wasn't going to let me off so easily. They say she remains because they got the wrong guy and she's angry about it. Like, everyone knew it, but no one cared because they wanted to blame someone. Don't you feel at least a little bad for her? She's still waiting for justice after all this time. Steffi. She only goes after people who don't believe in her, you know. I didn't like the way Steffi said that, like she had an idea forming that I wouldn't approve of, and I shook my head. Whatever it is, no. We could go out there, out to the spot she haunts. No, don't be dumb, I said. You don't believe anyway, so what's the big deal? I've walked past there a lot, okay. Nothing's ever happened. Have you gone after dark? Steffi had started to smile. No, but so what? That's when she's active, going in the day doesn't count. This is dumb, I said again. We'll go tonight. Every argument I had was met with questions of whether I was too afraid and Steffi mocking me for being chicken. She kept it up for the rest of lunch, through our shared science class, and then passed me notes in the halls between classes after that. By the time the final bell rang, she had worn me down. But not because I believe she's there. I made sure she knew. I'm just going so you shut up. The sun set just after 5 that evening. At 7, we met up on our bikes in front of my neighborhood. Her parents thought she was doing a project of mine. Mine thought I was at hers, and we had 2 hours to ride out to the farm where the limping woman was set to haunt and get back before they started trading phone calls. We pedaled hard and fast, leaving behind the glow from windows and street lamps, until darkness swallowed up the world around us. With only moonlight to guide us, we wove our way across town and passed into the outskirts, where the insects were louder, the stars brighter, and the safety that came from feeling like you were surrounded by other people fell away. It was hard not feel entirely exposed out on that old road, where flat fields rolled off into the distance on either side. There was the occasional barn or farmhouse set a ways off down long, dusty drives, but otherwise, it really was just us and our bikes and the night. Up ahead, Steffi said from behind me, "See the cross? That's the marker for her." We skid to a stop a few yards away from it and exchanged a glance almost lost in the shadows. "Scared?" she asked, breathless with excitement. "No," I said. It was an honest enough answer. I was nervous, sure, but who wouldn't be when you're outside after dark? "Remember, if you turn around, she gets you. If you try to run, she makes it worse. Just stand still when she's close by and say the words." Steffi spoke so seriously that I had to stifle a giggle. It was ridiculous. I kept trying to tell that to all the butterflies stirring in my stomach, but it didn't do much good. We climbed off our bikes and set them on their kickstand. Steffi groped about for my hand and entwined her fingers with mine. She was shaking. "Ready?" "Let's just get it over with," I replied. We walked up to where the cross was placed and paused. Steffi squeezed my hand and took in a slow, shuddering breath. Her fear was starting to have an effect on me, quickening my heartbeat, but I squared my shoulders and clenched my jaw and took a step forward. We crept along the roadside, careful to keep our eyes pointed straight ahead. Steffi kept reminding me in a trembling whisper that looking anywhere else could lead to trouble. A minute or two passed. It couldn't have been longer despite feeling like it, and nothing seemed to happen. My fear began to ebb, replaced by an admittedly relieved giddiness that I had been right, and I almost turned to Steffi to say, "I told you so." And then I realized how quiet it was. All the insects that had been singing loudly when we arrived had gone silent. There were no distant calls from night birds, no breeze passing over us, nothing. Just the sound of our own breathing. To my surprise, Steffi sighed, disappointed. I wondered if she realized how quiet everything had become. How could she not feel how claustrophobic it had become out on that open road, how closed off we were in the dark and the silence? I wanted to ask her, but the question was like a knot in my throat that I couldn't untangle. Behind us, grass rustled, followed by the crunch of loose gravel underfoot, like someone was pulling themselves slowly out of the field and onto the road. Drag, click, drag, click. Every hair on my body stood up at once. "Rena." I hadn't realized that my grip on Steffi's hand had tightened so much. I could feel her eyes on me, but couldn't bring myself to look at her. From somewhere over my shoulder, a woman started to sob softly. "Help me," she cried plaintively. "Rena," Steffi said again. "As she's coming," I managed to whisper. Instead of being scared, Steffi snorted. "Real funny. I get it, okay. The limping woman is just made up, I'm convinced now. You don't have to rub it in." Drag, click, drag, click. The unmistakable sound of someone inching towards us, slowly, painfully, crying out with each step. "Please," she begged, "I'm hurt and he's still out there." "Steffi," I hiss, tears burning in my eyes, "she's coming." There must have been something in my voice, a tightness that only true terror could cause, that convinced my friend that I wasn't just pretending. She grabbed my forearm with her other hand and clutched it until her nails were digging into my skin. "She only goes after people who don't believe," Steffi said. "That must be why." "What do?" I begged, my mind wide and blank. My entire body was screaming to run, to get away from that thing that was getting closer and closer, but Steffi's firm grasp and my own mounting dread held me in place. "Please," the limping woman sobbed, "turn around. Help me." "The words," Steffi said hurriedly. "You have to say the words when she's right behind you." "What words?" I wanted to scream, but I couldn't speak or think. I could only hear her. Drag, click, drag, click. The legend said you'd hear her uneven footsteps and be forced to listen to her pleas, but no one ever mentioned the smell. The stench of rotten earth and blood oozed through the air, slowly surrounding me and wrapping itself around me like tentacles, smothering me. I gagged and pressed my free hand over my mouth and shook my head violently, trying to clear it, trying to make sense of things. Steffi was jerking on my arm and saying something to me, over and over again, but I could barely hear her over the limping woman's cries. The smell was getting so strong, making my stomach pitch and heave until I thought I'd be sick. I leaned heavily on Steffi, and she pulled me in close so that her lips were beside my ear. Through the veil of panic and nausea, I heard her scream. Say the words. Drag. Click. Drag. Click. The limping woman was so close behind us now that I could feel the chill radiating off of her. The words, I thought. I had to say the words. It just reminds her of her own mother, and she gets distracted by her grief and leaves you alone. I heard Steffi's voice from the previous day echo in my head. Her mother. The words remind her of her mother. The limping woman's last words. Please. Bile rose in the back of my throat. My mother's waiting for me. The footsteps stopped and were replaced by a high-pitched, heart-wrenching keen. From somewhere off in the night, a dog started to howl. Insects began to sing again. The wind whistled across the field. Sounds of normalcy. Of life. The limping woman continued to screech while I found my legs again and, with Steffi in tow, tore back to the bikes. I never once looked up from the ground. The only thing I saw as we darted by was a pair of feet in torn stockings and pumps, the heel of one of which was missing. We didn't stop riding until we made it back to my lawn, and, when we got there, I raced to the bushes on the side of the house and vomited. Steffi claims she didn't hear or see anything that night, but she believes that I did. She believes that I encountered the limping woman. I tried to come up with some kind of rationalization for it, like power of suggestion or something, but when I think back to those footsteps and those sobs and that final scream, I know that there is only explanation. And now I, too, believe in the limping woman. Number 2. Country lanes. When I was about 10 years old, my dad was dating a woman who lived in a tiny village in a rural area. To get to her house, we would wind our way through countless narrow country lanes. Some opened up to views of farmers' fields, and some were encased in trees, creating a tunnel almost. I loved those tree tunnels so much. We would drive to her house and spend the day with her. I enjoyed going there because they always gave me lots of chocolates and cakes. As the days came to an end, we would say our goodbyes and start the long drive home, back through the country lanes. Usually, it was dark by that time, and the darkness in those lanes was so thick it felt like there would never be light again. I loved to be scared as a kid and still do, to this day. When I was younger, my dad and I would watch scary films together and go on scary rides. We loved it and we bonded over the scares. So, back to those nights in the lanes, my dad would slow the car slightly. We never drove fast down those lanes anyway, but he would slow the car slightly. It was barely noticeable to me. Then the headlights would go out, and we would be plunged into complete darkness for a few seconds, which always gained an excited squeal from me, and a chuckle from Dad. Back then it felt like it was incredibly dangerous and thrilling. In reality, my dad knew what he was doing, and would only do it on straight stretches of road, and only for a few seconds. We loved those country drives, and I loved going to his girlfriend's house. However, that was all to change. On one of the drives back, my dad had plunged us into darkness a couple of times already. My heart was beating fast, and I jiggled in my seat with excitement. The next time he did it, everything happened so fast I don't know what came first. The lights went off. I screamed with a delicious mixture of joy and fear. The car jolted to a stop and the engine died, and we sat in complete darkness. I gasped and asked Dad what was going on. He didn't answer. Panic began to bubble up and I reached out to him. My hands landed on his leather jacket. I nudged him, and then began shaking him. He sat silent. I could barely see anything. My eyes had adjusted to the dark slightly, but there was no moon, and we were in a tree tunnel. Panic overtook me and I started crying and screaming for Dad. When I heard his voice, the relief I felt was overwhelming. He asked if I saw that. Saw what? I said, I can't see anything, Dad. Turn the lights back on. I saw something before the lights went out. He seemed to be questioning himself more than telling me. He tried to start the engine, but nothing. His breathing was ragged and quick. He continued to try to start the engine, over and over again. It would just grind and grind, but never burst to life. He said he had a torch in the boot, told me he would be right back. I didn't want him to leave the car. I tried pleading with him to stay and saying we will just get the car going again. He turned in his seat, trying to calm his voice, and told me we need to move. It was dangerous. If a car comes, it won't see us and could crash into us. He needed to get the torch and have a look at the engine. He told me to stay inside and wait for him. I watched his shape leave the car and heard the boot opening, rummaging in the boot, and then the boot closing again. I strained to see outside, but all I could see were the dark shadows of trees. I saw the shape of my dad walk to the front of the car and open the bonnet. I watched the light of the torch moving around and eventually stopping and remaining still. It illuminated the small gap at the bottom of the windscreen. I sat still, listening to Dad clunk around in the engine, a chill starting to creep into the car. I tried to calm myself down, but it didn't work. I was staring at the slither of light at the bottom of the windscreen, willing Dad to come back. I don't know how long I sat there, but I started getting impatient and even more scared. I opened my door a crack and called Dad. Nothing. My breathing was quick and shallow. I was shivering from the cold, or the fear, I don't know which. I called Dad again, louder this time. Still nothing. I scrambled out of the car, tripping over my feet, and rounded the front of the car, where Dad should have been, fixing the engine. He was gone. I've never felt fear like that before. After my mind started racing. I looked around the car, thinking he might have gone back to the boot, but he wasn't anywhere. I made my way back to the front of the car and started trying to work the torch loose from where my dad had tied it to the bonnet. With torch in hand, I scanned the area, calling out to my dad over and over, trying to calm my breath and keep the tears at bay. Nothing but trees. Nothing but silence. I knew going into the tree line wouldn't be a good idea. I couldn't tell my left from right at the best of times. I stood at the front of the car, scanning the trees and screaming for Dad. A noise coming from the tree stopped my screams, and my breath hitched in my throat. I stared with the torch shining in the direction of the noise. I was shaking so much the torchlight wobbled. The noise was getting louder. I wanted to run back into the car and lock the doors, but I couldn't move. I just stared, wide-eyed in terror. It must have been shock of some sort. I watched and started to see movement. Out from the tree line jumped my dad. He shielded his eyes from the bright torchlight. His face was cut, and his leather jacket had tears in it. He saw me and yelled at me to get in the car. I ran into the passenger seat and sat, horrified, watching my dad slam the bonnet shut and clamber into the driver's seat, breathing heavily and shaking. He dragged the door shut and locked the car. Before I could ask him what had happened, I saw it. A tall hooded thing came out of the woods at the same place my dad had. The quivering torchlight illuminated its features. It was withered and its skin was gray. Eyes hollow, no nose, and its mouth was open in a perpetual scream. I only looked at it a second before dropping the torch and burying my face in my dad's chest, screaming and crying. His arms came around me and there I stayed. I daren't look at it again. My dad tried in vain to start the car again. It felt like forever before it stuttered, and then thankfully roared to life. The headlights came on. My dad told me it was gone. We got out of there as quickly as possible. I cried the whole way home. I never found out what happened in those woods. My dad never spoke of that night again. Anytime I would try to talk about it, a look came over my dad and he started trembling. We never went back down that lane, and I never saw that girlfriend of his again. If we do ever drive down country lanes now, the lights stay on full beam. Number 3. Cabin in the woods. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. Growing up, I scoffed at the idea of haunted houses and cursed objects. But that all changed when I inherited my grandfather's old cabin deep in the woods. As soon as I arrived, I felt a sense of unease. The cabin was old and musty, with creaky floorboards and a lingering smell of decay. But I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. It was like a low growl, almost inhuman in nature. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind. But then I heard something else, a sound that chilled me to my core. It was like something was scratching at the door, trying to get inside. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I crept towards the door. As I peered through the peephole, I saw something that I could not explain. Standing outside was a figure, hunched and twisted, with eyes that glowed like hot coals. Its skin was gray and mottled, like it had been dead for years. And as it turned to face me, I saw that it had no face, just a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled back in horror, my mind racing with fear. But then the figure spoke, a voice that was almost musical in its cadence. "Welcome to my domain," it said. You have inherited what is rightfully mine, and now you must pay the price. I tried to run, but the figure was too fast. It was like it was everywhere at once, moving through the shadows with ease. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and I would hear whispers coming from the walls. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then things took a turn for the worse. I would wake up in the middle of the night, covered in scratches and bite marks. And every morning, I would find strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that I could not decipher. I began to research the history of the cabin, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening. That's when I discovered the truth. Years ago, my grandfather had stumbled upon a cursed object in the woods. It was an old book, bound in human skin and filled with arcane symbols. He had brought it back to the cabin, hoping to study its secrets. But as he delved deeper into his pages, he had unleashed something unspeakable. The creature that haunted the cabin was a manifestation of the book's dark magic, a demon that fed on fear and pain. And now, it had set its sights on me. I tried to leave the cabin, but it was like the creature was drawing me back. I could feel its presence everywhere I went, whispering to me from the shadows. And then, one night, I saw it again. The creature was standing at the end of my bed, watching me with its glowing eyes. And then it began to move towards me, its twisted limbs scraping against the floor. I tried to run, but it was like I was trapped in molasses. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, its teeth grazing my skin. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I knew then that I could not stay in the cabin any longer. I gathered my things and fled into the woods. We hope you found these stories both thrilling and thought-provoking. Delving into the darkest parts of the human psyche can be a scary and unsettling experience, but it's also an important one. By exploring our deepest fears and desires, we can gain a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more spine-tingling content. And always remember to keep the lights on.